"Where are you?" I scream. Panicked, I run through the abandoned farm. I can't find her. Not in the old house, not in the barn. I run into the empty field, heart racing. As I scan the area, I run into a mound of dirt and trip, sprawling to the ground. Getting up, it hits me. Abandoned farm. And I just tripped over freshly tilled earth. Crouching down, I start frantically clawing with my hands, scooping handfuls of dirt, and then I hit something hard. Wood. "Are you in there?" I cry, pressing my ear to the wood. I hear muffled cries. I start digging again, but realize it's taking too long. Looking around, I see a garden shed. I sprint to it, ripping the door open. I see a shovel still caked in dirt, probably the same one that the bastard buried her with. I grab it. Running back, I start digging with purpose. Soon the wooden box is exposed. I toss the shovel and rip open the crate. She stares back at me, eyes wide, bound, gagged, but alive. I sigh with relief. Thank God. I reach into my bag, pulling out my rag and chloroform. I crouch down, placing it over her face. She struggles and then faints. I toss her over my shoulder. "Ah, hell," my brother says as I walk back to the truck with a smirk. "You found her." "Yep, you almost had me though." I laugh. "All right, my turn. Where'd you put her?" I gesture to the creek area. "Somewhere over there." "Drowning's an issue though." "Jerk," he says, running off. I smile watching him go. I love adult hide and seek. The Icicle Woman is a ghost story from Japan about a man who meets a ghostly woman who is beautiful and as slender as an icicle. The story is based on a Japanese folk tale called The Icicle Wife. There was a man who had never married. He lived alone in a small house in the wilderness of Japan. He was very lonely and longed for someone he could spend his life with. One winter morning, he was gazing out his window when he happened to notice some icicles hanging under the eaves of his house. He said to himself, "I wish I had a wife as beautiful as those icicles." That night, there was a knock on his front door. When the man answered it, he saw a beautiful woman standing on his doorstep. Her body was long and slender, and her face was pale as snow. He invited her in out of the cold. As time passed, the woman never left, and the couple fell in love. They decided to live as husband and wife. There was just one small problem. The man noticed that his beautiful wife never took a bath. Whenever he tried to talk to her about this, she refused to discuss it. One day, the husband had enough. He grabbed his wife and dragged her into the bathroom. She screamed and cried and tried to wiggle away from him. He threw her into the piping hot water, then left her there and slammed the door shut behind him. An hour passed, and all the man could hear was silence. There was no splashing sounds coming from the bathroom at all. Thinking this was strange, he opened the bathroom door and peeked inside. It was empty. His wife was gone. All that he saw floating in the water was the hair comb his wife always wore. The man was heartbroken. He assumed his wife had left him and ran away. He decided to move on with his life. A few months later, he met a new woman and they fell in love. She came to live with him and they passed the months happily together until winter came around again. After a night of heavy snowfall, the man looked out the window and noticed a huge icicle under the eaves of his house. He went outside to knock it off, but there was a woman standing outside in the snow. He recognized her. It was his wife. Inside the house, the new woman heard a terrible, agonized shriek. She rushed outside and found the man laying in the snow. He was dead, and blood was spreading out through the snow around his head. A single huge icicle had pierced right through his eye and penetrated his brain. One evening I was out hiking in the country when it started to rain heavily. I looked around for shelter, and down a muddy lane I spotted a dilapidated cottage with a thatched roof. When I opened the door, the inside was dark and damp. At the far end of the cottage there was a room with a little rusted stove. I packed some pieces of wood into it and lit the fire. Just as I was taking off my boots and sitting down to warm myself, I was startled to hear some footsteps in the passage outside. Suddenly, a man appeared in the doorway. He didn't even seem to notice me as he walked straight over to the stove and began warming his hands in front of it. He was dripping wet and his clothes were completely soaked. It didn't seem to be possible to get so wet, even on such a rainy night. Water dripped from his old hat and sizzled on the embers of the fire. I cleared my throat and the man turned his head and stared at me over his shoulder. I could see his teeth chattering and noticed that his face was pale white. "Not many people come here," he said. "Why's that?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Ghosts," he said, turning back to the fire. "The ghost of the man that lived here. It's a sad tale. He drowned himself down in the pond by the old mill. They found him floating there, and when they pulled him out, he was all slimy. Since then, some folks say they've seen him floating on the pond, and other folks have seen him lurking outside this cottage, walking up and down. Drowned himself in the pond, so they say, and now he walks the night." The man sighed, and I can hear the water squelch in his boots. "But that's just the story the superstitious people tell," he continued. "I never saw a ghost myself." "Oh, I haven't either," I laughed. "I never believe the tall tales people tell." He looked at me again and said, "Some folks do and some folks don't." The water was still oozing from his clothes, dripping all over the floor, and a dank smell filled the room. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Can't you get dry?" "Dry?" He laughed weakly, and his laughter turned to a hacking cough. "I can never get dry," he cried, and with that he thrust his muddy hands into the fire up to his elbows. The flames didn't touch him at all. Without another word, I grabbed my boots and ran screaming out into the night. A recent study by the National Psychiatric Institution in Boston, Massachusetts, concluded that no activity can account for the phenomenon known as nightmares. Whereas many dreams come from unconscious desires, most nightmares seem to come from an outside source, independent of the individual. In fact, when subjects are asked to recall nightmares, they are almost found in the same memory section as actual physical memories, not the section where normal dreams are replayed. So, in other words, those aliens and creatures you see at night in your dreams, they're real. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons, and I'll see you all next time.